My replacement couldn't reboot the system I'd built, so they offered me $500, 0 cents an hour to fix it. I said no. We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary, he said, not even trying to soften the blow. His smile didn't reach his eyes, just a satisfied smirk as if he'd finally crossed off the biggest item on his to-do list. I sat across from him, watching his carefully curated image crack slightly under fluorescent lighting. Graham Halverson, 42 years old, CTO for all of 6 months, MBA from somewhere that prints diplomas in italics, and a face that seemed to believe every dollar saved was a medal earned. Diane from HR sat beside him, lips tight, folder in hand. This isn't personal, he added, as if that made it better. It's just cost-cutting, the board's initiative, nothing to do with performance. My name is Reed Marlowe. I'm 56, and until this morning I was the chief systems engineer at Veltria Housing. I'd built their entire infrastructure. Every script, every layer, every workaround and protocol buried deep beneath systems they now call legacy. But to them, I was now just a line item. 2 months' salary, Diane said, sliding the folder across the table, plus accrued vacation. We appreciate your contributions, Reed. I picked up the folder, opened it briefly, then closed it again. Thank you, I said. Is that all? Graham blinked. Maybe he'd expected more. Anger, desperation, an attempt to justify my existence, something he could report back as difficult behavior. What would you like me to say? I asked. Most people in your position have questions, concerns, he offered. It seems pretty straightforward, I replied. That answer seemed to unsettle him more than any protest would have. Diane cleared her throat. We'd also appreciate your help with the transition, she added. Just a few weeks of consulting, perhaps, to help the new team understand the system architecture. I looked at her, then at Graham, then down at my hands. I'll think about it, I said, though we all knew I wouldn't. I stood, shook their hands, and walked out of that conference room for the last time. My office was quiet when I returned. The others had clearly heard the news already. No one made eye contact. I packed slowly, a ceramic mug my daughter painted in 8th grade, a framed photo of my wife, Elaine, and me standing in front of our first apartment, plant that had survived despite years of benign neglect, and a key small silver worn smooth tucked deep in my drawer. No one asked what it unlocked. I nodded at a few passing faces. Some tried to smile, most just looked down. I carried my box through the halls I'd helped design, past the server rooms I'd kept breathing through blackouts and system upgrades and impossible deadlines, past the offices of the same executives who once begged me to just make it work at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. I didn't look back. In the parking garage, I placed the box in the back seat of my truck. The air smelled of damp concrete and indifference. My phone buzzed. A message from Alan, the database admin I'd hired over a decade ago. Is it true? The team's panicking. I didn't respond. I drove home in silence. That evening, I sat on the deck behind my house overlooking Lake Ontario. The sky was bruised with dusk. Elaine brought me a glass of bourbon and sat beside me without speaking. After a while, she placed a hand on mine. What now? I shrugged. Something will turn up. I didn't say it with bitterness, just certainty. Because what Graham didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, is that I hadn't just maintained Veltria's systems. I'd designed them from the ground up. When they refused to budget for documentation, I'd made peace with being the only one who understood how it all fit together. It had started as a matter of necessity, then habit, then protection. No malice, just reality. I'd spent 18 years weaving complexity into function, not as a gatekeeper, but as a builder. No junior engineer, no matter how bright or eager, could see what lay beneath the surface, and I wasn't planning to explain it to anyone. The box sat beside the front door longer than it should have. I didn't touch it that night, or the next morning. Elaine asked once if I wanted to unpack. I said no. It wasn't that I couldn't face what was inside. It was that I didn't need to. Everything in that box had already been packed the day they stopped listening. The day I realized I was no longer being asked to build, just to sustain, and eventually to step aside. The coffee mug with the chipped handle had once been my daughter's favorite. She'd given it to me when she was 10, saying it looked engineer. The frame was from our 20th anniversary. The plant I'd nearly thrown out twice. All of it had lived on my desk for years. But that wasn't what gave the box weight. It was what it represented. Not just 18 years of work, But 18 years of being the person who caught things before they failed, who made other people's bad planning invisible, who answered the phone before it rang twice, not because it was my job, but because no one else would know what to do if I didn't. I sat on the deck with coffee that had long gone cold, watching the fog lift from the lake. The silence was unfamiliar, almost theatrical. My phone stayed face down on the table. No alarms, no notifications. The world still turned without me in it. That surprised me less than it should have. In the basement, I dusted off a laptop I hadn't used since the last acquisition. It still had system architecture drafts, code snippets, and diagrams no one else had ever seen. Not because I hid them, but because no one ever asked. I'd offered once, twice, more than that, really. We should create a knowledge base, I'd said. Build a team that documents as we go. Graham had laughed. Nobody reads documentation, Reed. We need speed, not manuals. I'd stopped suggesting things after that. When your experience is seen as an obstacle, you learn to become quiet, not bitter, just quiet. I didn't need revenge. I needed distance, and maybe, eventually, a reason to build something again. Upstairs, Elaine was on a Zoom call with her sister. I heard her say, "He's calm. Too calm." I smiled faintly. That was the thing about staying calm too long. People forget what lives beneath it. I opened the box, the mug, the photo, the key. That last one, small, cold, plain, was to a cabinet in the second server room. Most people didn't even know there were two. During the pandemic, I'd created a hidden failover cluster to keep operations running when half the primary systems were unstable due to remote access stress. Management hadn't approved the project, but they'd sure been relieved when nothing crashed. "Great work, Reed," they'd said. "Nice save." That key opened the backup switchboard behind the cabinets, where the last unsynchronized snapshot of the full network topology sat on encrypted drives. Legal had no idea. IT had forgotten. I hadn't. I placed the key in my desk drawer next to a small notebook. Just dates, changes, patterns I'd noticed in the past year. The consultants Graham brought in had never asked for access logs or anomaly flags. They just brought presentations, colorful slides, high-level plans that sounded exciting until someone actually tried to implement them. I'd kept notes not to trap anyone, but because I couldn't bear watching it fall apart without at least understanding why. That night, over dinner, Elaine said something that stuck. They made you believe that stability was cheap, that being reliable meant you were replaceable. I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because she was right. And I hated that she was right. 18 years of systems, redundancies no one remembered, security levels built on trust I no longer had, all carried in a cardboard box as if it were just another exit. I thought about the first week I joined Bayview Properties, before it became Veltria. Back then it was 4 buildings, 2 desktops, and a shared fax machine. The owner, Harold Bay, had handed me a ring of mismatched keys and said, "If you can make sense of this mess, you'll have a home here." I'd made sense of it, and then I'd built something better. And now they'd sold it, stripped it down, and sent me home with a severance package and a thank you folder. The box wasn't heavy because of what it held. It was heavy because of what it left behind. Most people assumed the hardest part of engineering was the building, writing code, drawing diagrams, mapping data flows, but they were wrong. The hardest part was staying invisible while holding everything together. When the system works, no one notices the architect. When it fails, they blame the last person who touched it. For 18 years, I was that invisible architect. Every server, every line of custom middleware, every exception protocol. They all had fingerprints, but none of them had names. I didn't need credit. I needed things to work. Veltria's entire platform had been layered like sediment. Each acquisition, each expansion, each pivot adding new demands on top of old foundations. I'd kept it functional, not by rewriting everything, but by understanding how each layer compensated for the one beneath it. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't flashy, but it was stable, and I knew it like the back of my hand. Graham never asked. He didn't need to. He already had a plan, and I didn't fit in it. He brought in 3 junior engineers fresh out of school, bright kids, eager, full of phrases like microservices and containerization. They shadowed me for a few weeks, asked decent questions, took notes. I answered patiently, watching them scribble down simplified explanations that missed half the nuance. I wasn't annoyed. They weren't the problem. The problem was that no one realized how much of Veltria's success depended on systems no one could diagram in a single slide. Systems that weren't intuitive but were necessary. The payment processor alone had over 60 exception routes based on tenant status, property rules, bank policies, and state-by-state regulations. One misstep and it would reject half the transactions silently. I knew the quirks, the timing windows, the checksum behavior from the API we no longer paid for but still used through grandfathered access. That wasn't in any manual. It lived in my head because the company never funded the team I asked for. And because when something needed fixing, I was the one they called, even if they didn't admit it publicly. Elaine used to joke that I ran the company more than the executives did. I always laughed it off. But deep down, I knew there was truth in it. When Harold Bay owned the company, he understood what I did. He didn't always get the details, but he respected that stability wasn't an accident. That changed when his son sold the company to a private equity group, fucked me over the head with the incentive package. Suddenly, stability was assumed, not maintained. Suddenly, I was too expensive to justify, not too valuable to lose. When Graham came in, he talked about modernization like it was gospel. Standardization will save us time and money, he'd say in meetings. We need to replace this legacy architecture with off-the-shelf solutions. I'd counter, showing him why those solutions wouldn't integrate cleanly. He'd nod politely, then do it anyway. Eventually, I stopped being invited to the meetings. They're pushing you out, Elaine said one night, sliding a plate of roast chicken in front of me. You need to prepare. I told her they'd never manage without me. Maybe that's the point, she said. I didn't want to believe it then. But now, sitting in my home office, I could see it clearly. They weren't just trying to save money. They were trying to reset the system, to make it theirs. But what Graham never understood, what the juniors hadn't even guessed, was that the system wasn't a machine, it was an ecosystem. Everything depended on everything else. If you touched the tenant portal without accounting for the way the maintenance scheduler fed its event data, the chain broke. If you bypassed the custom queue balancer in the billing processor, automated payments doubled or vanished entirely. And if you didn't know where the core process cache refreshed every morning at 2:14, i.e. I'm thanks to a workaround I'd written in 2015, then you'd spend days chasing phantom bugs that weren't bugs at all, just timing. Context, sequence, that wasn't arrogance, it was reality. I'd offered to document it, I'd asked for help. I'd been told next quarter. That quarter never came. The first voicemail came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the garage sorting through old routers and spare drives, half considering what I'd keep for future projects. The number flashed across my phone screen. Graham Halverson. I didn't answer. His voice came through 30 seconds later. Reed, this is Graham. We're seeing some strange behavior on the tenant portal. The new team's trying to trace it, but it's inconsistent. If you could give us a quick call back, just a few minutes, would really appreciate it. I let the message play, then deleted it. 15 minutes later, another call. Then another. By the end of the day, I had 5 voicemails, each more urgent than the last. The system I'd built wasn't failing. They were failing to understand it. That's the part they never budgeted for. At dinner, Elaine set down a dish of roasted vegetables and said nothing. I nodded my thanks, my mind still half on the 5th voicemail. Are you going to call them back? She asked. No, I said. They're not calling for me. They're calling for a version of me they undervalued. After dessert, I checked my phone again. A message from Alan. System's down. No one knows why. Graham's freaking out. I smiled, just faintly, and put the phone face down. The next morning, I brewed coffee, slowly, deliberately. Outside, the lake shimmered with quiet. Peace had its own tempo. My phone rang again. This time, Diane from HR. I didn't pick up. Reed, hi. We're hoping to discuss a short-term consulting engagement. There are some critical issues affecting operations. We're prepared to compensate accordingly. $300, 0 cents an hour, minimum 4-hour blocks. Please let us know. I didn't delete that one. I played it again. $300, 0 cents an hour. They were starting to understand. That afternoon, I received another call, this time from a board member I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. I didn't answer that either. Elaine raised an eyebrow. Is this the part where you make them sweat? No, I said. This is the part where I let reality do its job. The calls didn't stop. Graham, ejaculated Diane. Even Justin Bayou, who still sat on the board despite selling most of his stake. I let them pile up. Their desperation had a tone, raw, brittle, urgent in a way money couldn't fix. I went for a walk by the water, phone in my pocket, untouched. The world felt light, as if something heavy had been lifted off me without making a sound. That night, I sat in my study, sipping scotch and staring at the old architecture maps pinned to my corkboard, the dependencies, the load paths, the parts they thought were over-engineered. I hadn't designed them to break, but I had designed them to require understanding. Systems should not be idiot-proof. They should be respected. On day 4, the emails shifted tone. Diane again. Read. We're prepared to increase the offer. $500, 0 cents an hour. Flexible schedule, remote if you prefer. Please, the situation is critical. I reread the message 3 times, not because I didn't believe it, but because the number meant nothing. The silence I'd given them had more power than any hourly rate. I opened a clean page in my notebook and wrote a single line. When they finally realize who holds the system together, it's always after it's come apart. Then I closed the notebook, turned off my phone, and slept better than I had in years. It was almost sunset when the doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen with Elaine slicing vegetables, the scent of garlic and rosemary warming the air. She looked at me, I looked back. Neither of us moved at first. The bell rang again. You expecting anyone? She asked. I shook my head. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I saw a silhouette, tall, slightly hunched, hands clenched in front. I opened the door. Graham Halverson stood on my porch. His usually sharp suit was wrinkled at the edges. His tie was loose, glasses slightly askew. He looked smaller than I remembered. Reed, he began, and for the first time his voice wasn't coated in corporate polish. It cracked. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but we have a situation, a serious one. I didn't answer, just waited. The entire system is down, he said. Tenant portal, maintenance scheduling, payment processing, nothing's working. The new team is overwhelmed. We've tried bringing in outside consultants, but they're struggling to even understand how things were built. I leaned against the doorframe, let the silence stretch. He took a step forward. The board's authorized me to offer you a substantial consulting fee, $500 an hour. We'll sign whatever contract you need. You don't even have to come in. Just guide us remotely. I could feel the weight of Elaine's gaze from the kitchen. I could smell the beginnings of dinner, hear the quiet hum of life continuing without interruption. That sounds serious, I said. It is, he nodded quickly. We've never seen anything like this. The redundancies aren't kicking in. We don't even know what we're missing. I thought about the cardboard box in the garage, still unopened, the ceramic mug, the server cabinet key, the notebook with access chains no one had asked for. I thought about the final meeting. His smirk. We can get 3 juniors for your salary. I looked him in the eye. I'm sorry to hear about your troubles. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. But I have an interview tomorrow. His face twitched. Reed? Something will turn up, I said. Then I closed the door. It latched with a click that echoed louder than any argument. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the knife, and resumed chopping. Elaine didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I felt something in my chest. Cool, steady. Not triumph, not even relief. Just the quiet peace of choosing not to return to the place that didn't know your worth until it couldn't function without you. The email came the morning after I closed the door on Graham's stunned face. Subject line, exploring opportunities. The sender, Lawrence Devlin. I'd heard the name before, Devlin Systems, a regional competitor to Veltria, smaller but growing fast, known for thoughtful implementation and leadership that didn't treat engineering like a cost center. Lawrence's message was brief but direct. Reed, I've followed your work for years, heard about what happened at Veltria. I'm sorry. We've long admired what you built there, and we're in the process of expanding. Would you be open to a conversation? I read it twice before forwarding it to Elaine with no subject. She walked into my study 10 minutes later, holding her phone. Are you meeting him? I'm thinking about it. You should. The next afternoon, we met at a small coffee shop in downtown Rochester. Nothing flashy, no receptionist, no boardroom, just two people at a table near the window, steam rising from our mugs. Lawrence was older than I expected, late 50s, maybe early 60s, with kind eyes and the kind of calm that couldn't be faked. "I've followed your work for a long time," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "The integrated system you built at Valtria, it's become a bit of a legend in our industry." "No one has anything close to it," I shrugged. "It wasn't fancy, but it worked. It worked better than anything we've seen. That's what I want to talk about." He leaned in slightly. "We're about to scale, Reed, and I don't want something off the shelf. I want something built to last." "Built how?" I asked. "With patience, with redundancy, with respect for what happens when things fail. We don't want to start from scratch. We want to build better, smarter, cleaner." I stayed quiet. "And I want you to lead that build," he continued. "Chief systems architect, full autonomy, full support, salary 20% higher than Valtria, stock options, full benefits." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't want to want it for the wrong reasons. "Why me?" I asked. "There are younger guys out there, cheaper ones." He smiled. "We tried that. Hired 3 hotshots from MIT and Stanford. They built us a beautiful dashboard that crashed the moment more than 100 users logged in." I laughed for the first time in weeks. "We don't need trendy," Lawrence said. "We need reliable." I told him I'd sleep on it. But I knew. That night, Elaine handed me a folder she'd found in one of the garage boxes. It was an old proposal I'd written for Valtria years ago, an internal system redesign with documentation, training modules, and load testing phases. They'd rejected it for being too thorough. "You should build it," she said. "This time, somewhere they'll actually use it." The next morning, I called Lawrence and said yes. He didn't sound surprised. Within a week, I had a badge, a desk, and a team of 5. Alan joined me 2 days later, after formally resigning from Valtria. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. We were building forward. Graham kept calling. I stopped picking up after the 5th message. Payment records gone, tenants furious, consultants confused, board panicking. I forwarded the voicemails to a backup inbox and archived them. I didn't need to listen. I already knew how the story was going. At Devlin, we started fresh. Modular architecture, scalable layers, every piece documented, every engineer cross-trained. No single points of failure, no one person carrying the whole system. No more heroes, just systems that worked. And one afternoon, sitting in my new office, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass. A man with gray in his beard, clarity in his eyes, and a roadmap in his mind. I wasn't rebuilding a career, I was restoring a standard, and it had nothing to do with revenge. It just felt like what should have happened all along. A week after I signed with Devlin, Alan showed up in my office carrying his laptop and a bag that looked like it hadn't been unpacked in days. "Got time for lunch?" he asked. We grabbed sandwiches from a deli down the street, nothing fancy, pastrami, black coffee, a table by the window. Alan looked tired. "It's worse than you think," he said, leaning in. "They've lost access to historical data going back 3 years. Everything." I blinked. "I thought the backup systems were redundant." "They were," he said, "but only if you followed the protocols exactly. One wrong step, one skipped flag, one unsynced timestamp, and the system assumes it's under attack and locks out restore access." I nodded slowly. That was by design, not out of paranoia, but out of caution. Valtria never invested in proper backup management training, never ran drills, never budgeted for disaster recovery simulations. They just assumed redundancy was a checkbox, not a practice. "What happened?" I asked. Alan took a sip of his coffee. "The consultants triggered a partial restore before the log scrubber finished syncing. The system marked it as a rollback attack and corrupted the chain." "So," I said, "they killed their own history." He nodded, "Pretty much." I didn't feel joy, just inevitability. This wasn't sabotage, this was entropy, accelerated by ignorance. "That's not all," Alan said. He opened his laptop and showed me a folder full of archived internal emails. "I wasn't looking for anything, just trying to help the consultants understand the database. But then I found these." The email chain was between Graham and the board. Subject lines like legacy staff optimization and custom architecture phase out. And there it was. My name, highlighted and underlined in one slide. Marlowe's systems are over-engineered by design. He's made himself indispensable, not out of necessity, but control. I stared at it for a moment. He pitched your termination as a way to make the company leaner ahead of a potential sale, Alan continued. Promised full migration to off-the-shelf systems in 6 months, with projected cost savings of $1,200,000, 0 cents annually. I sat back. The push for standardization, the resistance to documentation, the sudden hiring of juniors. It all clicked. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Alan closed his laptop. Because I quit yesterday. And I'm not the only one. Half the IT team is gone. The consultants say it'll take 6 months minimum to rebuild functionality. And Veltria's biggest client, Westbrook Properties, is considering pulling out. They've lost faith in the system. I looked out the window, watching a cyclist pass by in the afternoon light. What will you do? Actually, Alan said with a faint grin, I was hoping Devlin might be hiring database admins. That afternoon, I brought the proposal to Lawrence. He didn't hesitate. If Alan can help us avoid what's happening to them, he's already worth it. We shook on it. Another brick in the foundation. That evening, as I was closing down my terminal, my phone buzzed again. Graham. Voicemail. Read, please. This is critical. Westbrook's threatening to terminate. The board's turning on me. We need your help. Name your price. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I tapped delete. You can't restore what you never respected, and no backup can bring back the trust you chose to erase. It came on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the air held just enough edge to remind you summer was almost gone. Lawrence called me into his office before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I just got off the phone with Jeffrey Westbrook, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. That got my attention. Westbrook Properties wasn't just Veltria's biggest client. They were the reason Veltria had expanded so quickly over the past 5 years. Managing over 10,000 units across the Northeast, they accounted for nearly a third of Veltria's revenue. Especially notified Veltria they'll be terminating their contract next month, Lawrence continued, and they want to know if we can take on their portfolio. I set my mug down. We're not ready, I said honestly. The new infrastructure's halfway there. The foundation is solid, but scaling it to absorb Westbrook in one move? Too risky. Lawrence didn't flinch. He's desperate, Reed. Tenants are furious. Their brand is taking hits online. The consulting team at Veltria is buying time, but everyone can tell they're not close to fixing anything. How much time is he offering? 12 weeks. Full funding for infrastructure expansion. We'd onboard in phases. I exhaled slowly. It wasn't impossible, but it would be tight. What would it take to make this work? He asked. I didn't answer right away. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at my desk, sketching diagrams, estimating resource loads, mapping out incremental rollout schedules. I ran simulations, checked failure points, and plotted fallback loops. By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't elegant, but it was strong, durable, meant to hold under weight. I walked into Lawrence's office and handed him the folder. Hybrid architecture, tiered onboarding, Western New York first, 2,000 units. If we hold, we scale up region by region. He flipped through the pages. You added a 3-week documentation phase in the middle, he said. That's going to cut into your 12-week window. It's non-negotiable, I replied. That's what failed Veltria. We document everything. Every process, every fix. We train the team before we scale. No one runs the system solo. Lawrence didn't argue, he just nodded. Let's move forward. The next 8 weeks moved like a current. We hired 5 new engineers. Alan built a translation tool to convert Veltria's data structure into our new schema. The team rotated in 12-hour cycles, sleeping in shifts, testing redundancies before they were needed. I worked through weekends without noticing the days. Not out of urgency, but purpose. For the first time in years, I was building something no one would have to hold together by themselves. Halfway through the project, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. Subject: Sincere apology. From Justin Bayav. Read. I want to apologize for how things ended. The board was misled. Graham's been removed. We're struggling to recover. If you're ever open to returning, the door is open. I didn't reply. There was nothing left there to return to. 10 weeks in, we were ready. Westbrook's pilot region would go live at midnight. If it held for 72 hours, the next phase would begin. That afternoon, Lawrence asked me to step into the conference room. A man I recognized immediately stood at the head of the table, Tall, gray suit, composed. Jeffrey Westbrook. So, you're the system architect, he said, shaking my hand. Lawrence says you've built something we can trust, something that won't crash every time we add new properties. That's the plan, I said. He nodded. I also hear you used to work at Veltria. I hesitated. I did. They're in bad shape, he said flatly. Trying to sell, but no one's buying, except one company. I looked at Lawrence, who smiled faintly. We're considering acquiring them, he said, at a quarter of what they were valued at 6 months ago. I blinked. And if we do, Lawrence continued, we'll need someone who understands both systems, someone to lead the integration, someone who knows what's worth keeping and what's worth burying. I didn't answer right away. Would you be willing? Westbrook asked. Only if we do it right, I said quietly. Full documentation, no shortcuts, no heroes. Agreed, Lawrence said. I walked out of the room without feeling triumphant. No smirk, no satisfaction, just a quiet awareness that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't "I told you so." It's simply building something better and letting them come to you. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I'd just finished a long day reviewing integration maps for the Westbrook migration and was about to shut my laptop when the screen lit up. Graham Halverson. I stared at the name. Part of me was tempted to let it go to voicemail like the others, but something made me answer. Not curiosity, not sympathy, just closure. Reed, he began, voice low, almost careful. Thanks for picking up. I didn't respond, just let the silence do the sorting. Look, he continued, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but things have escalated. Westbrook's departure is triggering other clients. We've lost access to payment records. Tenants are demanding answers. The board is demanding results, and our legal team, Graham, I said evenly, I'm employed elsewhere now, exclusively. We'll double whatever they're paying, he said quickly. 2 days, that's all we ask. Help us stabilize the system. Just tell us what we're doing wrong. It's not about the money. Then what is it? He snapped. Revenge? Are you enjoying this? I could hear the frustration leaking through, the unraveling of someone who thought damage control was a universal fix. No, I said slowly. I'm not enjoying it. But you made a business decision. You decided experience wasn't worth the cost. Now you're discovering what that really means. The board wants you back. Full reinstatement, signing bonus, autonomy. That won't change what's broken, I replied. And it won't undo the decisions that got you here. He paused. I could hear the shift in tone before it came. You know, he said, slower now, cooler, there could be legal implications if we determine you intentionally made the systems difficult to maintain. Non-compete clauses, IP concerns. There it was, the mask slipping off, the veiled threat. I didn't even flinch. The system is exactly as it was when I left. Exactly as it was when you denied my request for a documentation team. Every line of code belongs to Veltria as per contract. I've taken nothing except my knowledge, but feel free to have your lawyers contact mine. He didn't speak for a moment. I could feel the weight shift on his end, his attempt at pressure sliding off something far too grounded to move. This is going to haunt us, he said finally. You knew what would break and when. No, I said calmly. I just knew what I'd built and what it takes to keep it standing. Information I tried to share over and over. So this is it. This was it the moment you stopped listening. I ended the call, set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the lake was flat, the last light turning everything to silver and slate. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cold. I just felt still. Some endings don't need fire. Some boundaries don't need to be defended. They just need to be honored. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of what used to be Veltria Housing. The sign out front had already been replaced. Devlin Integrated Property Management. The building looked the same glass facade, same 2 shiny floors, but something had shifted beneath the surface. You could feel it. Not just in the branding, in the tone of the people walking the halls. They no longer rushed with eyes down. They looked up now. Some recognized me, some looked away. A few smiled, quiet nods, small acknowledgments, like the kind exchanged at funerals or reunions. Lawrence walked beside me, briefing me on the transition schedule. We'll complete the migration within 90 days, he said. Documentation's halfway done. Your new team's already started preparing the training modules. I nodded. What about the old staff? We retained those willing to adapt. Most of the executive tiers gone. Graham left quietly 2 weeks ago. Justin Bayview stayed on as a legacy liaison. He's been helpful, humble. I said nothing. We turned the corner toward the server wing. I hadn't seen this corridor since the day I carried out my box. It smelled the same, cool, sterile, humming with quiet current. We stopped at the double-glass doors leading into the old server room. My server room. Inside, I could see the racks I'd ordered, the cabling I'd diagrammed, the hardware I'd fought to keep alive year after year. The same blinking lights, the same cold glow. "Want to go in?" Lawrence asked. I shook my head. "No need," I said. "We're migrating to something better anyway." He didn't press. In the main conference room, the remaining Valtria employees were waiting. Some sat straight, alert. Others folded their hands, unsure. Lawrence opened the meeting. "Today marks a new beginning," he said, "and a commitment to doing things right." Many of you already know Reed Marlowe. He built the original systems that ran this company for nearly 2 decades, and now he'll be leading the integration, turning 2 histories into 1 future. I stepped forward. No script, no applause, just facts. "We'll be transitioning over the next 3 months," I said. "But this isn't just a tech migration. It's a culture change. We document, we train, we build systems that outlive any individual. No one here will be left behind, so long as they choose to move forward." Some looked relieved, others looked wary. That was okay. Change doesn't need to feel safe at first. It just needs to be honest. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway. Justin found me near the break room, where we used to stand during late-night patch windows, trading small talk over vending machine coffee. "My father asked about you," he said. "He's retired now, lives in Florida, still follows company news." "How is Harold?" I asked. "Good, fishing, a lot." He paused. "He said letting you go would be the biggest mistake this company could make." I didn't respond. Not out of indifference, just acceptance. He continued. "I've learned a lot these past few months. Value isn't always visible until it's gone." I nodded once. That was all it needed. We didn't owe each other anything else. That evening, I left the building through the side entrance, no box in hand, no badge to turn in, just a quiet breath of air that tasted different now. Not cleaner, just earned. The old server room sat at the end of the west corridor, same as always, fluorescent lights overhead, cold tile floors beneath. I walked past the new signage, past the boxes labeled Legacy Equipment, Phase Out Q3, and paused in front of the glass. Inside, the heartbeat of what I'd once built still blinked in patterned rhythm. Routers, firewalls, storage towers, backup drives. The same humming drone filled the space, steady like breath. I used to know every cable by memory, every redundancy by instinct. I'd once spent 48 straight hours in there during a winter storm, running the entire city grid off generators while remote nodes failed one by one. I'd slept in the corner chair with a clipboard in my lap and half a protein bar in my pocket. Now it was just another room on a decommissioned schedule. One of the engineers on our new integration team walked by and stopped. "That used to be yours, right?" he asked. I nodded. "You going in?" "No," I said. "Why not?" He wasn't being pushy, just curious, like someone asking if you ever visit the house you grew up in. "Because we're not keeping it," I replied. "And because what matters isn't inside that room anymore." He watched me for a second longer, then nodded. "Fair enough." He walked on. I stood there a little longer, just watching, not from sentimentality, just out of respect. That room had carried things it was never built to carry. Systems meant for 50 tenants had scaled to 50,000. Patches over patches, workarounds over budget gaps. Emergency fix layered on executive oversight. Not because it was smart, because it was necessary. Because when they said, "We'll fix that next quarter," I made sure we still made it to next quarter, and the quarter after that. It wasn't pride that kept me standing outside the door. It was peace. Because now, finally, I didn't need to prove I'd held it together. They were living in the evidence. Upstairs, our new system hummed through virtual stacks. Elastic architecture, documented redundancies, roles rotated weekly, no single hero, just a team that knew what each other did and why it mattered. We didn't build to survive anymore. We built to last. I walked away from the glass, didn't look back. There are rooms you leave by choice, and rooms you outgrow because you finally built the place you should have had all along. We were 3 weeks from completing the full migration when Lawrence called me into his office again. The air felt lighter than usual. The chaos had receded. The system was stable, tested, trusted. For the first time in a long while, we weren't chasing fires, we were deciding what to plant next. Lawrence slid a document across the table. "The board approved your proposal," he said. I didn't ask which one, but he knew. "The Technical Education Division will launch next quarter," he continued. "Full autonomy. Budget is yours. You pick the instructors. You design the curriculum." I nodded, not because I expected less, but because it meant more than I could express. That division had been my one request. Not a raise, not a new title, not an office. Just a space to train people the right way. To teach them that building things wasn't about duct tape and miracle patches. It was about anticipation, documentation, communication. It was about giving the next engineer a system they could understand, expand, and hand off without fear. I walked out of Lawrence's office with the file tucked under my arm and a quiet warmth in my chest. Not pride, not triumph, just purpose. We named it the Endurance Program not because it was flashy, but because that's what good systems do. They endure. The first class had 12 engineers, some fresh from college, some burnt out from mismanaged firms, some from Viltria, looking to unlearn habits of patch and pray. I sat with them the first day, no slides, no kickoff ceremony, just a whiteboard and a question. What's the first thing that breaks when no one documents anything? Someone said, "The system." Another added, "The people maintaining it." I nodded. Both are true. But first, it's trust. I told them stories, not of sabotage, but of small omissions. The unchecked field, the missing comment, the undocumented failover that cost a team their weekend. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. They understood. Over the weeks, we built from first principles. We simulated failures and forced handoffs. They wrote documentation before writing code. They worked in pairs, rotated roles, reviewed each other's logic like it was gospel, and every week they presented a system, not for approval, but for understanding. I never raised my voice, never gave grades, just asked questions. Who inherits your work when you leave? What happens if you're not here tomorrow? If no one can explain it, did you really build it, or just hide inside it? Outside that classroom, Devlin kept growing. Westbrook expanded their contract, new clients arrived, the infrastructure we built didn't bend, didn't blink, it simply worked, quietly, predictably, and no one knew the architect's name. That was the point. One evening, as I was locking up the classroom, Lawrence passed by. "You ever miss the spotlight?" he asked. "No," I said, "because this is brighter than any boardroom." 1 year after the acquisition, Devlin Integrated Property Management had become the largest firm of its kind in the Northeast. The migration was complete, all systems functional, all teams trained. The headlines were respectful. The investors were satisfied, the clients were loyal, but that wasn't what I noticed. What I noticed was that I hadn't been paged on a weekend in over 6 months. No one came to me in a panic whispering, "We're down." No one asked me where the failover script was or what that blinking light in rack 4 meant. Because they already knew. Because we had built it that way. One October morning, I parked my truck near the same trail I used to walk when Viltria felt too loud. The leaves along Lake Ontario had turned amber and crimson, each tree burning slowly from the inside out. I zipped my jacket, stepped onto the path, and let the silence come. It wasn't the silence of absence anymore. It was the silence of completion. I passed a couple walking their dog, a jogger with wireless earbuds, a child tossing pebbles into the lake. The world spun quietly, and for once I wasn't holding it together for anyone. I thought about Alan, now leading the data infrastructure team. I thought about the Endurance Program, now on its 3rd cohort. I thought about a system so stable that most of its users had forgotten it even existed. And I smiled. Elaine had asked me the night before, so what now? I told her, now, we let what we built do its job, and we go live our lives. I reached the bend in the trail, where the trees parted and the lake opened up like a mirror. Wind slid across the water in ripples. I sat on the bench we'd found years ago, the one that faced the horizon, not the buildings. No laptop, no phone, just a thermos of coffee and the sound of something I hadn't heard in a long time, nothing needing me. My thoughts drifted. Not to what I'd lost, but to what I'd carried, what I'd handed off. what I'd let go of. No one remembers the scaffolding once the building stands. And that's okay. We don't build for credit, we build for continuity. A single maple leaf landed beside my boot. I picked it up, studied the veins. So much structure in something that never demands to be noticed. I placed it on the bench beside me, stood up, and began walking again. Not because there was something waiting at the end, but because sometimes the work is done, and the only thing left is to walk away knowing you built something that won't fall. Some victories don't need to be declared. They don't arrive with applause, don't show up in quarterly reports, and don't come wrapped in grand speeches. They come quietly at the moment when proving yourself is no longer necessary, and only what's true remains. Reed never fought back when he was dismissed, never begged when he was replaced, and never retaliated when they came crawling back. He simply rebuilt. This time, the right way. Not to hold on to power, but to pass on understanding. And that's exactly why the system that once discarded him had to return, not because it had changed, but because he hadn't. In a world obsessed with speed and noise, stillness, depth, and consistency may be the last real form of strength, the kind that holds steady when everything else begins to crack. Reed didn't burn the bridge. He just built a better one, stronger, wider, and this time, with room for others to walk alongside him. If this story made you pause, breathe, or reflect, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated, only to quietly build something stronger? Our channel shares stories about quiet strength, earned wisdom, and the kind of responses that don't come with noise, but with clarity. New stories every week, and one of them might just be yours. Thank you for watching. We're here to remind you, silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the most powerful reply you can give.